right, here we are at the start of another semester, fall 22, and I teach a class as an adjunct at Elmhurst University. And over the summer, some things have changed in higher education. Some problems have come up, some things have been solved, some people got raises, other people didn't. We'll talk about what's happening in higher education and what role we have in it, especially if you're on the teaching side of it. Hello, I'm James Callahan, and this is the Do-Over Show, where we take a second look at the things that are happening in our world so that we can take advantage of them and don't get left out.
Guys are just talking. Talking, la 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 la, like this is business as usual. It's not.
So, what has happened recently in higher education? What are some of the updates, the news, and obviously the big one, student loan forgiveness, which we'll get to in a minute. But how are they going to impact us in higher ed, whether as students or teachers?
We're trying to solve the problem here, Billy.
Not like this, you're not. You're not even looking at the problem.
We're very aware of the problem.
Okay, good. What's the problem?
The first news is that enrollments continue to decrease in colleges and universities throughout the world, and especially in the United States. The numbers that are happening now coming in through the fall of 22 show that this decline has accelerated as colleges and universities just can't attract and can't keep hold of their admissions.
Who's Fabio?
It's a shortstop. He's a shortstop from Seattle.
Yeah, this is no time to push the panic button.
We're still at a rate of almost 50% of those who start college or university in the U.S. don't finish it. But even with that number, an ordinary number for the past 2 decades, the number of new enrollments continues to drop. Now we know that during the pandemic, colleges and universities lost in the U.S. 1.3 million students. They just evaporated, dropped off the map. They're not participating in higher education. So that depressed the numbers significantly, but that trend has been in place since the 2010s. Now, in the real world of supply and demand, you'd expect that lower demand means lower pricing, but not in higher education. Not when over 90% of the student loans are backed by the federal government. It has been an artificial backstop to higher education. And you wonder where all the money has gone. The money they're talking about forgiving? Well, it's gone into endowments in college and university buildings. Tuition costs continue to increase. Compensation levels for faculty, the frontline teachers, continues to be steady or decrease. It actually took a hit by a few percentage points in 21. That means that the only actual increase in compensation and in employment lines open during the past few years has been for administrators. There are more deans and vice presidents in higher education today than ever. That shrinking number of incoming students means that colleges and universities can't grow their way out of economic hardship. And they don't know what to do about it. So they cut frontline service providers, teachers, even as they continue to increase administrative roles at a record pace. Faculty compensation raises, when they do occur over the past several years, have been limited to 1/2 or 1/3 of the rate of inflation. That means between 1% and 3% is an ordinary pay increase. Oh hey, and my compensation level teaching as an adjunct at Elmhurst University remained the same. So it means I'm making less this semester than I was last semester and the semester before that. And I've done a video on what I actually make. You can check that video out here and see how I fare. So what's happening with compensation levels today in higher education? And why isn't higher education a little bit more aggressive in tackling the problem? Well, the most obvious reason is because out of all the changes in the job force and labor market that we've endured today, where it's finally the market of the labor force to actually increase, put pressure on wages to increase because of the high demand for available workers, where there are 2 openings available for every job seeker today. That is not the case in higher education. Higher education is still graduating 10 Ph.D.s each year for each and every advertised opening in the teaching level. That means that it is not the market of higher education, those who have a Ph.D., those who have advanced degrees or a terminal degree, and that's not changing anytime soon. Here's one of those typically outrageous examples we love to fixate on, and you're not sure if you should laugh at it or cry, but UCLA advertised a position for a chemist or a biochemist to teach. Good teaching track record, 3 to 5 recommendations, strong recommendations, and they offer a compensation of $0. Yes, just for the privilege of being able to say that you taught chemistry or biochemistry at UCLA, you put that on your CV and that's all the compensation you'll receive. No money, just the prestige. So if you're not interested in working for free, and most people aren't, you have to ask yourself, well, where can I find a living wage within higher education today? What's happening because of this in higher education, since there are very few opportunities for higher pay that reflects the quality of work or effort you put into the opportunity, more and more in higher education are doing what the general workforce is doing, and that is they're practicing a form of what people call today quiet quitting. That is, they're doing what's required to get their job, to get tenure, or to maintain their job, post-tenure review at some institutions, but they're not doing anything extra. They're not doing extracurricular activities, they're not doing volunteer activities, committee assignments that don't have compensation tied to them. More and more college and university professors and teachers and adjuncts are doing the minimum. I typically refuse any extracurricular activities associated with adjunct because I'm not compensated for them. Even if it's a planning meeting for a course that I teach that's part of a general ed curriculum, and they say we want to get an update on the gen ed requirements, I said, fine, send me an email, send me the PowerPoint. I'll be happy to look at it as I prepare my syllabus for the next semester. But I'm not going to give you 2 hours of my time. I'm not going to give you hundreds of dollars worth of my time. And this was while famous brand name colleges and universities started to cut back on faculty lines, dropping majors and entire departments that had maybe 1 or 2 full-time profs in them because they couldn't justify the cost of maintaining those unique, discrete little areas. Now, sometimes it happened, the accusation was because of prejudice, bias, racism, gender discrimination. And yet some of them simply couldn't justify it because in a college or university, like my graduate school, Marquette, they dropped a couple programs because they only had a handful of students that were actually majoring or minoring in that field. They couldn't justify millions of dollars in faculty compensation, so they eliminated programs and they cut the number of discrete lines of majors and minors that were available in order to tighten the belt and make it through a time called a pandemic. But after the pandemic, whenever it eases or whenever higher education feels the ease of the new normal of post-pandemic higher education, do you think they're going to add back those faculty lines? No. You see, once you cut back, you never return to that level. Oh, and by the way, something else became very apparent during this time frame, and that is that higher education enjoys one of the largest pay gaps between men and women who have Ph.D.s in the humanities, just to keep it clear. There's almost a 20% pay gap that men within those fields make more than women within those fields. Same degrees, same qualifications, same caseload, and yet somehow higher education that's supposed to be on the cutting edge of transforming equity and inclusion in the marketplace today has fallen behind the general population grossly, significantly, alarmingly. And now for the big news, and that is the recent announcement by the president of student loan forgiveness for a wide variety of student loan holders. And as they say, the devil's in the details. We're going to go through the details. I'll let people fight it out, but let's go through and make sure that we understand what's happening, what's being proposed, and how, if you benefit from it, how do you access it? The proposed forgiveness of between $10,000 and $20,000 just as a starter, there's a lot more beyond that. Well, that proposed forgiveness will soon be rolled out, but it's just for those who make less than $125,000 as individuals or less than $250,000 as households in your filing for the last couple years of your federal taxes. But this only applies to federally backed student loans, where now over 90% of student loans are federally backed, so that's good news. But for those of you that took out a personal loan or went to your bank and took out a line of credit in order to pay for higher education, you're not included in this student loan forgiveness. Only federally backed student loans are included of $10,000 to $20,000. The other thing that's curious about this is that it only applies to loans that were taken out before June 30th of this year, 2022. That means that you can't just today look at the news and say, oh great, all my loans are going to be forgiven. I'm going to take out student loans in the fall of 22. We don't know what's going to happen next. There probably will be another part to this. But for those who take out loans now, for the fall semester, yeah, you're not part of this student loan forgiveness proposal. Now, the interesting part of this, the more that I mentioned before that no one's really talking about, is that the amount of the minimum contribution you make in repayment to your loans has been dropped of from 10% to 5% of your disposable income. That is, after housing and food allowances. That is, you calculate it with the lender and you figure out that you used to have to pay 10% of that remaining figure of what you make each day, week, month. Now it's been dropped to 5%. So it's going to lower the minimum that people will, of the remaining loans that they have outstanding, that they will have to repay. And here's the interesting thing. After 20 years of making that minimum payment, whatever outstanding balance remains will be forgiven as a lump sum. It will go away. That's why some estimate that the cost of this to the average tax-paying American is anywhere between $1,000 and $3,500 per person for everyone to pay for student loan forgiveness for, as it turns out, only about 1/3 of Americans actually participate in higher education. 1/3. So that means everyone will be paying a significant amount of money, a total bill of $300 million to $1 trillion for this proposed student loan forgiveness, but only 1/3 of Americans, you in higher education, will benefit. Like I said, I'm going to let other people have the fight on this, let them go through the details. But I just want you to know what the landscape is and also whether or not you're included in this. Now, if you're not sure what kind of student loans you have or where they are, how much they are even, you can log into your FAFSA account, use your FSA ID, and there you can find your student aid report or your SAR. And that will tell you what kind of loans that you're supposed to repay and whether or not they will be eligible for this proposed forgiveness, student loan forgiveness. That's a great place to start. And by the way, I'll put a link down in the description of not only FAFSA, but also a couple news reporting agencies that give you some details, some really helpful details to figure out if you qualify, if you benefit from this proposed student loan forgiveness. Hey, and while you're there, would you consider liking the video, because it really helps, and subscribing so you don't miss the next episode of The Do-Over Show? I'm so glad you found me, and I found you. Thanks.